now it's time once again for Frumpy Professor here on the BSPC, with your host, Yanks Pudding. Good evening and welcome. I'm Yanks Pudding, and tonight we will be discussing chapters 6 and 7 from J. MacLeod's Ain't No Makin' It. First of all, as you read along in these two chapters, I want you to think to yourself, what is the purpose of school? Is it just a place where kids go and learn, and perhaps to be in a club or play on a sports team or to sing in the choir? Well, I would propose to you that schools are much more than this. Aside from the family, the institution of education, broadly defined, is the single most powerful force shaping the lives of kids from ages 3 or 4 up until at least age 17. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, well, what about religion? That's a pretty powerful institution too, and you're right. The difference is, not every child is religious, and amongst those who are religious, they do not all study the same religion. But if you want to talk about something that is almost universal to every child growing up in a modern society, it is education. Everyone has to go to school. Every school, whether private or public, has well-established sets of rules, norms, expectations, etc. And those govern not only what kids learn, but how they learn it. For example, if you selected, say, 100 schools at random from all around the country, public and private schools, you will find that in almost all of them there are consistent classroom environments. That is, the teacher is almost always standing and teaching from the front of the classroom, and the students are almost always sitting at desks in rows, although in some elementary schools, children do sit around tables. Children start to learn from their first day of school that the teacher is the authority, and students are there to learn from the teacher. The idea of group learning, or of students learning to establish their own goals for what they want to learn, is practically unthinkable. Of course, there are some practicality issues there. I mean, for example, kindergartners probably don't have any idea what's really best for them to learn. So kids in those early grades do need some guidance. But a number of research studies show that when kids in middle and high schools have a chance to establish their own goals for what they want to learn, they become invested in their own education, and therefore they work harder and achieve more. However, that kind of learning model is still rare. You will see still in those aforementioned 100 schools that most middle and high school classrooms will be set up with the teacher as the authority and the students as the sponges. Now, there is a purpose for that kind of teacher-student relationship, according to theorists like Bowles and Gintis, who we read about in Chapter 2 of MacLeod's book. You see, the workplace is structured with very much the same kind of rules and expectations as we see in schools. The boss says what to do, and those who work for him or her do it. If you're one of the workers and you don't do what you're told, or if you try to do things your own way, or if you have an idea that you think would work better than what your boss is proposing, well, oftentimes you will get into trouble. Businesses and nonprofits and public sector jobs give lots of lip service to creativity, but it's rare to find employment where workers are actually encouraged to take matters into their own hands. Yes! Yeah! Manchester United 1-0! Ha! How are you liking that move to Los Angeles now, Beckham? Sorry. Apologies, excuse me. Right. The BSBC regret the previous outburst on behalf of Dr. Pudding. Apparently a studio monitor had been left on showing the Manchester-Liverpool match. Schools, according to Bowles and Gintis, and as you'll see in chapters 6 and 7 in MacLeod's book, are there to prepare us for the expectations of the workforce. So when you hear someone say that schools need to be preparing our children for the world of work, just pause for a second and think to yourself, exactly what does that really mean? Learning to color within the lines, metaphorically speaking, has implications from preschool all the way to retirement. Now, you're probably thinking to yourself, wow, this bloke's really on about this. I don't mean for this to sound so depressing, and I'm not saying this because I expect you to go out and start a campaign to change it all. I just want you to think like a sociologist on this for a minute. When you think about schools, step outside of your own experiences and your own understanding of schooling and ponder to yourself, what was my own education preparing me for? I also don't want you to think there is some grand conspiracy out there amongst the power brokers of the world who intend to keep education this way so they can raise new generations of docile worker bees. It's nothing that clever, and yet it's much more complex. The people who set the policies, who make the rules, who run the schools, who teach in the classrooms, they were all brought up in the same kind of system. So it's only natural for them to maintain education based on the same kinds of expectations that they were taught. Right, so when you're reading Chapter 6 in MacLeod, look at the programs for at-risk kids in Clarendon Heights. The programs that are supposed to prepare them for the world of work. You've got the Enterprise Co-op. You've got the Building Trades and Services program. So how do the expectations of those school programs affect the behavior or the conformity of the brothers and the hallway hangers? And what implications does that have for their futures? Consider those questions when we meet online for the discussion forum. Until that time, for the BSBC, I'm Yanks Pudding. Thank you and good night. This has been another lecture from the Frumpy Professor, featuring Dr. Yanks Pudding here on the BSBC. The BSBC recognize their obligation to present opposing points of view, and will do so whenever they bloody well please.